Right, what I'm going to do this morning is really give you just an overview on what multimedia is, and as I've titled it, what it is and why you should care about it. Because for young journalists, multimedia is going to become, or is already and is going to become increasingly important. So it's going to be in two parts really. The first part we're just going to look at generally what multimedia is and how we use it in the media. But the particular focus on news agencies, which is my background, but also with newspapers. And the second half we'll look at journalists and what it means for you, what sort of skills you're going to need to develop in order to give yourself the best job prospects. So all your classmates that miss this, they're going to lose out on this big time. So, first of all, let's look at the traditional newspaper layouts. I mean, you're all very familiar with this. This is something you're taught every day in the classroom, right? And you need to go for a nice strong headline, something which is going to catch everyone's attention, bring them in. You're looking at, sometimes they have a subhead. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. It's a lower font headline which comes underneath, a second headline basically underneath, which usually gives a little bit more information. You have one big photo, again a nice eye-catching photograph, and then you have the text, and sometimes they have graphics. It very much depends. This is very much a very, very traditional way of doing things in newspapers. That is a classic example of exactly how it's done. Now I use the Sun because the Sun is famous in the UK. It's a tabloid newspaper, but it's famous for its catchy headlines. And this is actually an award-winning headline. It was during the Falklands War, when Britain had a little bit of a fight in the Falklands against the Argentinians, and the Brits won. But during the war, a submarine sank an Argentinian ship, which had been hovering nearby. And this was the headline that the Sun went with. Gotcha is slang for got you, caught you. Right? It was eye-catching, it won awards. It also got a lot of trouble from foreign media and the United Nations and what have you, who thought it was insensitive and it was gloating and it was silly, but the British public loved it. I think with that particular headline, I think they increased their circulation about twofold with the Sun. So they sold something like an extra maybe 2-3 million copies with that headline alone. Another famous one, which I couldn't help put in there, Freddie Starr ate my hamster. Freddie Starr is a comedian in Britain, very famous comedian. This is back in the 80s, and as you can see from the story, what happened is he jokingly pretended to eat his girlfriend's hamster. So the Sun got hold of this, and what is a fairly mediocre story, really. I mean, he didn't actually eat it, I don't think. But they managed to turn it into a great front page story with a really, really good catchy headline. Right? So, and again, you've got the subhead underneath there, which tells you what actually happened. She's described as a beauty. Well, I mean, you know, in the Sun, every woman under 30, you know, is considered a beauty. You know, they always put that in there. She's a model, she's a beauty, she's a star, she's a something or other. Right? She's never just a woman. Right? It doesn't exist in the Sun. But this gives an idea of the traditional ones, right? And this is something that we have to translate towards multimedia as well. But you'll see further on how we do this. But these are some important skills. Now, the key thing with multimedia, and I won't go on about this too long because it is fairly complicated. Do any of you know XML, programming language? You do. Do you know NewsML? NewsML. NewsML is actually a version of XML specifically developed. Welcome, find a seat somewhere if you can squeeze in. You haven't missed much. It's all right. And the book is on sale afterwards, so don't worry. NewsML was the language programming language which was developed by news organizations, including AFP, Reuters, Bloomberg, AP. And it was designed to use XML. Now, XML is an online programming language which is the next generation from HTML. Now, you're all familiar, I think, with HTML, how they produce web pages. And if you're familiar with it, you'll know it's a very limited language, especially in terms of archiving and in terms of what you can do. XML, extraneous markup language, is far more powerful. It allows you to create elements, and it allows you to create any elements you want, and you can give attributes to those elements, and you can have parent elements, child elements, It's very, very touchy-feely language, you know. But it's been extremely useful for the news media because it means that we've now been able to move away from the standard sort of online internet page with, you know, your big headline there and a couple of pictures which don't do anything, into producing pretty much anything we want, and also allowing us to adapt towards other technologies, mobile phones, using SMS, using WAP headlines, and so on. So it's been very useful. That is just an example of XML, actually NewsML, which I threw in there just to frighten people, really. You don't need to learn this, by the way, if you want to be a journalist, which is the good news. Okay, if you want to be a multimedia editor, unfortunately, you do have to learn this. Okay, but what this shows you is if you look at the top one, the elements, for example, you've got NewsML, then you've got the catalog elements, a news envelope, date and time. You've got news item, you've got identifications for it, you've got a news identifier, you've got a provider, you've got a date, all these are down the left-hand side there. But what this means, in actual fact, is these are different elements that can be created. So when we come to break up a piece of text, for example, that we put out, if we want to put it out to many different clients, it doesn't mean that we have to do a new piece of text and a new program for each and every client. If someone just wants headlines, if someone wants the lead as well, if they want a lead and a photograph, if they want a photograph and a photo caption, any combinations can all be done using NewsML. And what it means is for us, when we're creating this back in the office, when we start moving these things, all of these heads can be in the metadata that we create. Now, you're all familiar with what metadata is? Not so sure. Basically, metadata is actually filling in the blocks here. So you'd have things like date and time. That would be the date and time of the story. That can be filled in. So we can fill all these things in here. We can put the headline in a separate box, date line in a separate box, byline in a separate box, and so on and so on. And then when the client comes, we just create a program like this, which we call a cascading style sheet. And they can have whatever they want, and they can display it any way they want. All right, so it's very, very versatile. Okay? Now, you need to understand the concept of this because it is central to multimedia. A lot of people, when they think of multimedia, especially in the media, that's a multimedia in the media. Okay, but when they think about it, they tend to think in terms of, oh yeah, well, the multimedia is you've got text, you've got a photograph, and you've got a flashy little video down here at the bottom. That's multimedia. It's a great deal more than that, right? And it's important that as a journalist, you're thinking in terms of what you can create, right? I'll go into this in more detail later on, but it is important that you understand that behind all of this, there is a very versatile programming language, which allows you to do a lot of different things and sell your basic product in a lot of different ways to dozens of different clients. So we're no longer looking at the traditional clients. It used to be, for example, at AFP, a news agency, we sold to newspapers. We sold to the radio, and we sold to television as well. But we didn't sell any footage to television. They used us more as an alert service so they could see what was going on. These were our traditional clients. We had a traditional way of writing. We had a traditional way of presenting everything. Now these clients, as you know, radio stations are closing down, newspapers are closing down. They're slashing staff all over the place, unfortunately. And we now need to approach new clients. For example, we have a client in Japan who is an educational client. They provide online services to universities. So we sell a lot of our content to them, which they then package for people who are doing business studies. They can look at business news. People who are doing lifestyle or fashion and things, they can look at lifestyle things and so on. So we've got to think about non-traditional clients now in the media. Not just the sales team, but also the journalists. They've got to be thinking in terms of what is going to make a story which is going to go to these other clients. Basically, this is a sort of very rough breakdown of what we can do. As you see, you've got text in the middle. That's the core product for the media, some kind of text. Either a voice report, or it's going to be, you know, you sitting down writing your story like you did last night in your exam, right? Around it, all the different things we can do. You can do some of them, you can do all of them, whatever combination you want. Ideally, what we want to be looking at is putting out a product online, on the online version of a newspaper, for example. We'll try and incorporate almost all of these. The reason for that is because clients these days, or even individual users, how many of you actually use your portable phones or go online to read the news. Yeah?
Almost every day.
Right. Virtually everyone does nowadays. I mean, you see people walking along, they've got, you know, especially businessmen and things, they've got their little phones there, and they're doing lots of this and that and the other, and looking very important, you know. It used to be you had the Financial Times underneath your arm there, or the Wall Street Journal, and you were walking around saying, look, I've got that, I'm important. Now it's your phone. Sorry, don't bother me, I'm, you know, whew. It's probably a shopping list, but, you know. But a lot of people get this, and it's very important, so they get, what we do is we use things like SMS, which are just alerts, and we can send them just 120 characters for an SMS message, 120 characters. For a WhatsApp message, it's 30 characters. So you've got to rewrite a news headline in 30 characters, including spaces. It takes a fair amount of rewriting, and it's got to make sense. Right? That's the other thing. So you couldn't say, Obama steps down, because a lot of people might not know who Obama is. So it's going to be US President steps down. But that's going to be a little bit more than 30 characters, so you've got to step down, resigns, you know. We can spend hours sort of trying to fiddle around with these things, which goes back to what I was talking about, the traditional headline, the gotcha type headlines, right? I'm not sure how gotcha would work as on a WAP headline, but it would certainly get people reading it. So these are the different ones that we can do. Basically, photos, well, text and photos is traditional. The difference is, though, in the type of photo that we want to use. For example, we've recently started changing the one that we use online because of iPad. iPad displays horizontal, not portrait. It can display portrait, actually you just don't need to do that, but it leaves black lines on the sides. This is not good for a news photograph. So when we start putting, the first picture we put with our text nowadays is horizontal. So we've got to try and find horizontal ones, and we've got to try and teach the photographers, don't take portrait photographs anymore. The only trouble is that most of our sport ones, like basketball, because they're long shots, you know, I mean, basketball players are fairly long anyway, but you've got this sort of, you know, dunking or throwing the ball or what have you. They're very often horizontal, which means we have to either end up cropping them so you only get half the player, or we have to try and find the one shot, which is usually the horizontal one. You've got about 50 players there and fans, and you can't tell who the heck they are or what they're doing. So it is a new way of thinking about the horizontal shot now. And that's because a new type of technology is coming along. In 6 months' time or in 2 or 3 months' time, someone's going to come up with something else. And we're going to have to, again, rethink the way we present. The other one, links. We've found that most users, online users, want to have links to stories. What they want to see is they want to see a quick story, a headline, maybe a lead paragraph on the page when they log on. But they want to be able to go to background stories. They want archives, they want related news, they want what's going on in the news and so on. So all kinds of links. Links to websites. I mean, you cannot write a story about a website, for example, without actually physically embedding a link on your online page. It's been known to happen, but it's not good because people get very upset. Right? So links, again, important thing. Again, as a journalist, when you're writing stories, when you're thinking about stories, you know, what kind of links go with it? Is it about a website? Is there a possible link? Is there a film on YouTube, for example, that you could use? All of these sort of things. We've got to start thinking in terms of links. Audio, not so much these days, but although we do use, when I mentioned the video actually, with the audio, it is something that can be used. It's one of the areas we're looking at, for example, for people who are visually impaired. This is an added value service in many ways because it would take a lot more work. It also creates a much bigger package which you're trying to upload to your website and things like that. So that's still very much in its infancy. Dynamic graphics, basically the difference between those, as you know, in the dynamic graphics you can play around with. In the World Cup we had some really good dynamic graphics created which people played with. So you had the teams and you could click on them and you could watch a little animation of people scoring a goal, you know, and things like that. It was all a bit weird because they all looked a bit amorphous, you know, these strange looking faces. It's kind of scary, but it's very popular. Graphics are not very good for online use, actually. The traditional newspaper graphic is small, it's very detailed, and it also gets out of date very quickly because you'll have a graphic with a plane crash and there'll be a map and it'll be pointing, this is where it crashed. 6 people killed in plane crash, and then by the time that goes online, it's 10 people killed. So it's automatically out of date. So we have to be very careful with the graphics we use and keep them very simple, horizontal, right? Not portrait again, because it's illegible when it's portrait. Very little text. So we have to try and coax the graphics department into producing essentially almost 2 sets of graphics that we can use. So we don't use graphics very often. The most we'll use for that will be for maps, a very simple map with a little sort of explosion and an arrow saying, you know, this is where it happened. Video. Video is something very new, at least in terms of most of the media. It is hugely expensive to do. We have to hire a lot of staff. You've got cameras, you've got editing suites, you've got all kinds of stuff. Initially, when we started doing video, we weren't sure what the clients wanted. Did they want added value? I mean, you've got TV stations who are going out there and shooting video. You've got dozens of small little companies that go out specializing in filming things. Did we really want, you know, did the media now want to come in and start doing that? Setting up basically a TV production. And initially we thought, no, what we'll do is we'll do what they call added value. So if there's, for example, a riot, and the news organizations, the big ones, CNN and so on, the TV stations can film the riot, what we would do is then we would film something to the sides, the scene, maybe a little interview with some woman saying, I'm very frightened, you know, I just got to go to my shop here, but you know, all these people in the street. Just something to build up, something we could then use differently. Unfortunately, this is not what clients want. They want news video. So we are now at a stage where we're going to have to try and produce video for every single news story we put out. We're looking at a target, we were looking initially at a target of 20%, we've exceeded that. We're now at 30% or more, but it's going to be increasingly we're going to be doing this. And what we're doing is not the standard broadcast video, we're doing web clips. And there's a big difference between that. I don't, because we'll be here all day if we're talking about it. It's a subject in itself and what constitutes a web clip. Basically, web clips, less than a minute, background sound, quality doesn't matter so much as long as it's effective. It's the sort of thing you see on YouTube. When you go onto YouTube and you watch a riot or something like that, you might see some policeman walloping a student, you know, and you've got about 10 seconds of that and the camera's all over the place. This is the kind of thing, it works very, very well as a web clip. And people will click on these, but they won't click on it if it's too long. And they won't click on it if it's an interview. If someone's standing there talking like this, I'm in the street here, like, you know, no, that's for TV. They don't want to see that on the web. So again, this is a new way of thinking. It's a way, we're training journalists to do this. We're training photographers to do this. So again, this is something that young journalists are going to have to know how to do, or at least understand the concept of it. So this is another way it's changing. Why go online? Well, there's been a huge debate in the media, as you know, over the last, well, as you certainly know, over the last few years, that what are we going to do? Are we going to go online? How are we going to make money? Why should we go online? Can we still sell newspapers the old-fashioned way on the street corner and so on? You know, is it the end of the newspaper? Basic reasons for going online, and this is actually very simplified, but advertising. Advertisers are moving online, so we need to go online to attract advertisers. It's a very simple equation, but this is what's happening. Traditionally in newspapers, what you would get is you would get people advertising. They'd buy big ads. You've all seen them in newspapers and magazines, a full-page ad, even some of the small ads dotted around, you know, to fill up gaps and things like that. This generated very classified ads, big revenue generator for many newspapers. But now that people are starting to go online and getting their news online, newspaper sales are dropping, and advertisers, of course, are chasing where the viewers are, and that's online. That means that the media has to go online, and we have to present a product which people are going to want to look at. There's still a debate now about whether or not we should charge for this. Do you charge people to use it? Do you charge for the added value things but let them see the basics? This model is still being tested. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I mean, this is something we'll see in a couple of years down the line. But that basically is why you need an online presence. Very simple. And again, here, this is the other reason why it's all changed is readers are now going online. Readers are much more tech savvy and they use technology. This is the key point. People are very tech savvy. And this works two ways. It also means that if you don't get it right, if your presentation on the page is a little bit dodgy, your videos don't work, your links don't work, and things like that, people know it and they get angry about it. They don't assume, oh, it's my computer's not working. They go, oh, these idiots, they don't know what they're doing. Boom, they're off to another website and they'll never come back. You know, you've got 10 seconds. The surveys show that you've got 10 seconds to attract someone when they go on a website. And that doesn't matter if it's a shopping website or any website. If you can catch them in the first 10 seconds, they will stay on the website and they will click through. If you can't catch them in the first 10 seconds, you've lost them, they've moved on. So we've got to catch them in 10 seconds. Fortunately, newspapers and the media are very good at catching people's attention. We saw those, we showed the Sun, the gotcha headline. It was just the classic one. But it gets people's attention. This is what we have to start thinking and doing. Let's take a break. Ooh. Okay. What I was going to do here actually is, I mean, I don't know if people want to, we haven't been going that long, but there's a lot more to come, so I don't know if people want to either take 2 minutes or we'll go straight online and we'll look at a couple of websites online now and just plough through.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Go on.
Let's just plough through then. Hang on a second. No, that's not what I wanted. No, that's not what I wanted either. What's going on here? I got this set up to do some websites, but it isn't playing the game. So, does someone want to? How do we get out of this one? Normally, you just press this bar, don't you? Oh, I could do it that way. All right, we're going to go to CNN.
Okay.
Hopefully, we're going to go to CNN. Come on, CNN.
It's not the fastest connection. Oh, yeah. It can be painfully, like, dial-up slow sometimes.
This is one of the problems with online media. You've got to be fast, very fast as well. But what we'll do is just have a look. I mean, CNN, I chose mostly at random, but CNN are quite good in what they do. Yeah, here we go. As you can see, they've got lots of things on there, but basically, they're drawing people in with these two first photographs. This is the main news. This is what's happening. This is eye-catching. Okay? And they got a third for our tigers. Now, we use the tiger story as well. There's a conference going on about Save the Tiger. This goes towards content as well, but I'll mention content a little bit later on. But this is just to see what's going on. Now, you've got the advertising on the one side, of course, very important. This is how they make money. But you've got eye-catching, very quick page, draw people in, and then they can click on these, and it will take them somewhere. Yes, no, maybe. It is going. Yeah, there we go. And Internet Explorer has a problem. Why am I not surprised? All right, well, sorry, it didn't work, but you get the basic idea. We'll go on and talk on content in a minute anyway. I'll go through the key points there. But it gives you some idea of what these websites are going to look like. But it also shows you the importance. I mean, obviously CNN video is what they do, but even with traditional news organizations, and dare we call up another one? No, perhaps not. Perhaps we're pushing our luck, I think, if we call up another one. But if you go to a newspaper website, you'll find that they're incorporating more and more video in there as well, because this is important. It's what people want to look at. We're dealing with a new generation of readers now. It's a generation that wants news quickly. It wants it kept simple. It wants it to be fun. It's no longer can you have, like the Times newspaper years ago used to be a broadsheet, great big newspaper like that, column after column of news with a few photographs chucked in. People used to sit and read that. Not anymore. They don't want that. They want sound bites. They want it quick. They want it jazzy. They also want a mixture. So if we can get rid of this one. No. Come on. How did we do this last time? F5. Oh, we're right at the beginning, but never mind. We'll whiz through that. See, Freddie Starr ate my hamster. That's another famous headline. I did. I pointed out who Freddie Starr was. He was a famous comedian.
Oh, was he?
You know Freddie Starr?
I know the headline, but I never knew who he was.
Freddie Starr was a very funny comedian. He's still around, actually. Okay, I hope you enjoyed your break. Back. What do people want and how do they want it? Right. This is the key thing for you as journalists. What we found, news. That is the bread and butter of what we do in the media. We present the news. First and foremost, forget about all the glitz, forget about all the other stuff. We are in the business of presenting news, right? And that is still very true. Now, what they want is, in particular, is they want a very wide coverage. When people go to a website now, they don't want to just see what's going on in their own little towns. That might interest them, but they do want to see a wider coverage. They want to be able to go and see what's going on in other parts of the world, and they want it quick and simple. Basically, they want highlights. They don't want a great big 1,000, 2,000 word story and giving all the details of a speech that Obama may have made. What they want is, Obama said this, someone else said that, this is what it means, thank you very much, click on this link and see a photograph, see a video. Right? And then they'll go on to related stories. They do want analysis and they do want depth, but they want the option to use that. This is why we use links. So if you saw on the CNN page, for example, when we looked at that, you've got a big photograph and you've just got a very little headline underneath, basically just saying what it is. If you want to look at this story, you want to look at the tigers, you want to look at the other one, you click on it and you go on. So it's giving the readers the options. You can just read the headlines and you can just go to all the highlights. They have the little highlights button there. You can get all the headlines with maybe a lead paragraph. So 30 or 40 words just giving you the gist of what's going on, and that will tell you what's happened today. If anything catches your fancy, you can click on it and then go and have a look at it. And then you can look at background articles and so on. So when we start producing a news story, we need to be thinking in terms of producing fact files. We need to be thinking of scene pieces. Scene pieces basically are where you talk to the people involved. If there's been a plane crash, for example, you talk to some of the survivors. You might talk to some of the police there, saying, oh, it was terrible, I've never seen anything like this in 30 years as a policeman, you know, this is the worst I've ever seen, and so on. Builds up the scene for the reader who's not there, okay? We'll also have things like biographies of people, if someone famous is there. There's a lot of background material that has to be produced. So it's no longer a question of just doing the news story and hoping for the best. You've got to do the news story and you've got to look for the links behind it, okay? You've got to go into archives. This is like NewsML, for example, is excellent for archiving because of all the different categories, all the different elements you can create. So you can archive backwards and forwards to different stories, related stories, analysis pieces. You're producing a package now, in some ways far more than you were before. In a newspaper before, you were limited by space. All right? So when you had your main story, you might have a couple of column inches for a little sidebar, a little biography or something like that, but there was a limit on space. Online, there is no limit. You can create as much as you want. You can go as much depth as the reader wants. All right? But this is what they're looking for. This is what people want. So we need to be thinking in these terms as well. When you're thinking we're producing a news package, but what else links to it? What other stories are relevant to that? Right? So, I mean, you've got Obama and Medvedev, I beg his pardon, the Russian president. So in a story like that, we'd have the basic story of them meeting and what they discussed. We would then have archive stories about the START Treaty, which is one of the nuclear weapons treaty that they were discussing. We would have something about Obama, what he's doing there. This was actually taken at the APEC meeting. What he was doing there, what the Russian president was doing there as well. These would be sidebar stories as well. We would have an analysis piece on relations between the US and Russia, and so on. So you know, you've got a lot of different things, a lot of different elements that you can bring into a story. Okay. So we have to think about that. But news is still very much the core. Sports, always a favourite. That was not chosen by accident, that picture. But sports have always been very big. If you know, anyone who's worked in newspapers for a number of years will know that you've got your news and you've got your sports. And then business kind of came along. But sport was always the big one. It's always been very popular. It remains very popular. Increasingly, the range of sports that we have to cover is huge. I mean, beforehand, you know, a few years ago, we wouldn't put basketball stories much on the European websites, or we wouldn't send them out to European clients. They just weren't interested in basketball. Nowadays, everyone knows about basketball. Everyone wants to hear about it. You've got fans all over the place. Football as well. Soccer, that is, not football. Again, everyone knows about it. You've got teams traveling around the world. You've got the World Cup with an audience of several billion watching it. So again, we've got to start putting these out. So much so that within AFP, when we work for clients, we've actually created separate categories, which are filled with nothing but cricket as one of our categories. Cricket has become a huge sport, surprisingly enough. A lot of people never knew what it was, but it's now been in the Asian Games for the first time. I haven't actually seen any of the cricket in the Asian Games. It must have been fun. And China did quite well, apparently. So we got cricket in the Asian Games. Exactly. And Afghanistan beat Pakistan, which is a shock because Pakistan is one of the traditional powerhouses. But it gives an indication these things are going on, more and more people are interested, which means as news organizations, you've got to start, especially as a wire service like ourselves, we've got to start putting this stuff out for clients, creating new pages, creating a cricket page, creating a football page, a sports page. All of these are separate products that we now have to put out to attract clients because they want it in more depth, they want more of it. Photographs, so here, want separate access to specific sports. Again, this is one of the things we do. So we'll have separate cricket as well as a main sport one. We have separate sports. We don't have a separate basketball and things yet, but I can see that coming in the not too distant future. I mean, that's very much an American market at the moment for a lot of the sports, but probably baseball and basketball are two that have moved well out, especially basketball. So that's, again, you've got to have a lot of coverage of that. Visual consumption, heavy visual consumption. It's all about photographs in sport, really. I mean, you can write 800 words and not give anyone any idea of what the excitement is of actually being there, right? So this is an area where we do need a lot of photographic coverage, and we also need to make sure our photographers photograph the main incidents. It's no good having a story saying that someone was sent off for kicking someone and we have no photographs of him actually, kicking, or at least being sent off looking shameful. You've got to have those photographs. Lots and lots and lots of photographs. Lots of graphics. With the World Cup, for example, you've got all the team graphics, you've got the players' statistics, you've got World Cup statistics. All of these things lend themselves to graphics. So whenever we get these sorts of events coming up, it's a huge amount of resources have to go into it. And even more now than we've gone online. Before, when we were catering to newspapers, you had your photographs, you had your text, that was fine, and a few graphics, a few nice charts would work. Now we need animated graphics. We've had specialized organizations, companies that work with us, with AFP, to create specialized animated graphics for the World Cup. I mentioned earlier about the little cartoon where you could see them scoring a goal. And this was happening almost in real time, so people could click on these things to match, and they could see it. It was shown on television here, actually, certainly TVB. On the news, they didn't have access to the actual footage from the World Cup, so they used animation to show you how the goal's being scored, things like that. This is something new. This is something we've got to be thinking about. The technology exists. We can't ignore it. The media can't say, well, that's nothing to do with us. We take photographs, we write stories, that's our lot. No, it's new technology. Something new's come along. We've got to find some way that we can apply our product to that new technology. Lifestyle and health. This has become, as I say here, increasingly popular. Again, anyone that's been in the media for a while will realize that lifestyle has begun to fill up newspaper pages. I mean, it used to be that you had the occasional feature, usually on the Sunday newspapers, that have lots of lifestyle, how to do your garden, what clothes to wear, and so on. Not anymore. In fact, our clients are demanding more and more lifestyle. This is what people want to read about. They want fashion, they want technology, they want hair fashions, they want who's doing what, makeup, everything to do with lifestyle. So it's, again, something that we, as a news agency, traditionally didn't do very much. We covered the main shows like New York Fashion Week, Milan, Paris, and so on. But we didn't cover in any great depth. Now we have to cover in considerable depth. And we also now have a separate category which we sell online for our online content. Clients can now buy a lifestyle category, which we do separately. So again, we've had to move in that direction, and we have to look at doing this. And it means teaching journalists to go out there and write lifestyle stories. Teaching photographers to go out and take good photographs, because it is a skill doing that. I mean, a fashion show is enormously difficult to photograph. It's enormously difficult to write about. You've got to have all the right terms and talk about chiffon and whatever the materials are. You've got to know the stuff. So, but these are things we've got to start getting people to do, and we've got to start putting these in, because this is something which is increasingly important. I would say that lifestyle is, in terms of the amount of coverage and in percentage, is probably the same as sport, perhaps a little bit higher. So news is going to be pushed to one side, and more of these things. It doesn't mean we can cut back on the amount of news we do. It means we've got to add these other ones as well. So it just means we've got to do more, which is the fun thing with journalists. Arts and sciences, again, people want to know about science. They want to know some of the things like the Mars probes that recently landed, or didn't land, whatever case. The shuttle, whenever the shuttle takes off. I mean, you'd normally think, a few years ago, someone asked me, and I thought, shuttle, well, if you're interested in space travel, maybe. If you're a Star Trek fan, okay. But otherwise, who wants to know? It's one of our top news stories, and we have a separate category for top news. The space shuttle launches are top news because people want to read about it. They're interested. So again, thinking outside of the box, thinking about new things that we have to do. Science, we've got all the things like new discoveries in space, new cures and treatments. Global warming, obviously environment is a huge, huge issue. That's moved along with news as well. But this is, again, something people want to know about. And again, it's, talking about linking to things. When you get news stories, linking back to stories on global warming, this is something you can do to build up a package on these things. People and entertainment, this has always been popular. But for the traditional news and traditional newspapers, perhaps not as much. I mean, you had specialized fan magazines, specialized entertainment magazines and newspapers that went with all the gossip and all the details of who was doing what to whom and why and where and had they been arrested for it. But now, increasingly, we've got to start doing that. This is what clients are demanding. We send online material to them, so we now have separate people magazine. For our internet journal, which is our main online product, we now have a separate section for people, because we now have to do that as well. So this is an additional demand. This is an additional demand not only on news agencies, but also on newspapers. Right? This is information they have to put out there. This is what people want to read. And again, if you go online to any of the major newspapers, you'll see that increasingly on these pages there's links to gossip stories. And it's not just the tabloid newspapers that are doing that. Business. This works in a couple of ways. You've got the traditional news business that newspapers always used to run, but you've also got things like spot news, stock markets, analysis, current trends and forecasts. Obviously, nowadays, all businessmen are linked into the internet 24/7, most of them. They're all sitting there, you can see, the number of computer screens behind the stockbrokers, and they've got their little so I got my little gadgets here as well. They've got their little gadgets and they're checking in all the time, real-time news. This is something we need to produce as well. Previously with newspapers, you would look at wrapping it up at the end of the day. You'd have a few business stories at the end of the day, maybe an analysis, an interview, and you'd get the stock prices and you'd print those in there as well. With an online presence, we can no longer do that. We can't wait to the end of the day. We can't let the day develop and then wrap it all into a nice package, which is what we used to do as a news agency. We'd write the main business stories towards the end of the day to send to clients to put on their pages as they came to their deadlines. Now there are no deadlines. Once the markets here close, they open somewhere else. So constantly you've got to be feeding this information, feeding the news in there and keeping up with it. It also means that our correspondents in New York have got to be aware of what's been happening in Hong Kong, what's been happening in London, what's been happening in Germany. They've got to be aware of the stock markets. They can't just focus, I'm New York, that's all I do. They have to be more aware of it and they have to write about it. So it means for business journalists, it's become increasingly specialized. Anyone that is interested in doing business journalism would need to have at least a basic business degree, just to be able to comprehend what's actually going on and understand the trends. I think if you're a young journalist and you wanted to do business, you would have to have some sort of business qualification, probably a degree, maybe an MBA or something like that. And increasingly, you've got journalists who've got MBAs. We've had several people who have gone off, taken a year's sabbatical to do an MBA just so they can come back, just to understand it, right? Because it is enormously complex. So again, specializations, these are things that are beginning to happen. Businesses growing in that direction. People and places. These are the sort of things that traditionally you might have seen in National Geographic or magazines like that, or travel magazines, talking about the best place to have your holiday, how people live in these places, you have a feature story perhaps on a tribe somewhere in Africa who are digging for water, or they've got a new well that the UN has built for them and it's changed their lives, things like this. And This again would be something you'd have a few feature writers doing. Very often newspapers would tend to use freelancers to do this sort of work, who would come to them and say, look, I've just spent 6 months in Africa and I've got these stories to sell, and they would put a couple of stories in. Not anymore. Now everyone wants to know about it. They know about these places, they're interested, they want to know about it. It means that news agencies like AFP have got to start writing about it, which means our correspondents who are already writing about everything else we've discussed have now got to be thinking in terms of writing these kinds of features as well. Again, production, but your abilities to write, you cannot focus on one thing anymore. You've got to be able to multitask. That's a buzzword you're going to hear a lot. I hate it because it's meaningless, but it means that as a journalist you've got to be interested in the world around you. You cannot simply focus on a very narrow front, because you need these skills, and these are the skills that we need from people when we recruit people, that they can do this. This is what multimedia is also about. All right, so the key points, these are some of the things that readers have mentioned in surveys. News, they want the news quickly and kept to the main points. This is what I was talking about before. Handheld devices, small devices, headlines, SMS messages, WhatsApp headlines, things like that. But they want it quickly. They don't want to wait. They don't want to find out from somewhere else that it's happened. They want the news happening instantly, which means that your online pages have got to be as up-to-date as possible. They want the option to explore stories in depth, as we said, and they also want to be entertained. This is something, again, that when you talk to journalists, it's something that they seem to have difficulty grasping in many cases, especially traditional journalists, because they don't see the news as entertainment. News is serious, it's Pulitzer Prize stuff. You're going to go for serious, hard-hitting news, but it's not. It's entertainment. This is what we're in now. In many respects, the news media is in the entertainment business. Right? Because we now have to pander, well, not, sorry, pander is probably not the right word to use. We are directed, sorry? Cater to, thank you very much. We have to cater to an exclusive, versatile, intelligent, wonderful audience out there. And this is what they want. So you've got to give them what they want. Now, this is nothing new in media. A lot of journalists, or especially the older journalists, will sort of go, well, this is all new, I don't like this. But in fact, if you look at the very first newspaper that was created in the UK back in the mid-19th century, which was the Daily Mail, it was simply a court reporting newspaper. It went to the courts and it wrote about the interesting, exciting stories, the murders, the rapes, the attacks, lunatic on loose in streets. And it was shock and horror. And that was the first newspaper. It was entertainment. So this is what the media has always done. I mean, the Sun newspaper, the tabloid newspapers have always understood that. There is a reason why tabloid newspapers sell as many copies as they do, or did. There's a reason that the Sun has a 3 million daily readership, because it knows how to cater to its audience and it entertains them. Now we've all moved online, this is something we also have to think about. It doesn't mean we have to dumb it down. We don't have to do what the Sun does and have a page 3, topless models, and talk about nothing but gossip and scandal and which stars are getting divorced and things like that. It doesn't have to go in that direction. But we have to think in terms of stories that are going to entertain the audience, things that they're going to be interested in. One of our top stories, for example, we do every day, we look at Yahoo and Google, who are two of our clients, to see which of the stories are most clicked on. And one of our top stories recently was a koala bear rescued in a fire in Australia. That's a top world news story. And that was what everyone wanted to read about, this cute little cuddly koala bear singed with a little bandage on its paw, That's what they wanted. This was one of the top stories. We did a story yesterday about, they've just designated in the Arctic an area for polar bears. So we had lots of pictures of cute polar bears. That was one of our top stories. This is what people want. They want entertainment. They'll read the news by all means, but news, right, we got the news, now let's have something funny, let's have something that entertains us. So we need to be thinking in terms of these kinds of stories. And again, these are not ones that we've traditionally been writing about in the media particularly, unless you work for a tabloid. So now everyone's got to start thinking about what we produce. And again, it goes into the idea that you've got to have visual as well. You've got to have photographs. No good writing about cute koala bears when you haven't got a picture of a koala bear. Okay, so you've got to have a picture of the koala bear, and that's a whole new ball game. This is just, again, this is just a summation really of what I've been saying, but again, I put it at the top here, informative and entertaining, because I think that is one of the key points that we have to think about. When we produce, especially multimedia journalism, we have to be thinking about entertaining. Right? You can have a dull as dust news story. The text can be really dull. It can be a business meeting. You've got all kinds of meetings, like you've got OPEC meetings, you've got finance ministers meeting and so on. And what they talk about is so boring. I mean, half of them aren't interested in it either, but they talk about this, they've got reams of it. The way to make something like that entertaining is, what about the photographs? You don't need a photograph of someone head and shoulders standing there giving a speech. You know, why not have a photograph of the guy scratching his head or falling over or having a joke with someone else, you know, two of them laughing? It brings it alive, it makes it more entertaining, it makes it more interesting, it shows them as finance ministers being human, which will appall a lot of people, but there you go, you can show this. Don't go for the traditional head and shoulders. This is old-fashioned journalism, this is what they used to go for. We go for something a little bit interesting. Maybe some video, maybe you've got a picture, for example, when Obama visited India recently, last month. No, it was earlier this month. One of the photographs that was most clicked on and one of the videos that was most looked on was Mrs. Obama dancing with school children. And then when Obama went and danced with the school children as well, that suddenly became the one. They didn't want to see him talking to the Indian Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister or visiting the Gandhi Center. They wanted Obama dancing. That was fun, that was entertaining. So that would be the first photograph. I mean, that was the photograph we put at the top of the story. That was the front page photograph. No question about it. So again, it's a way of thinking, how you can make it entertaining, how you can broaden out your stories. Must be usable in different formats and across technologies. Yeah, this is very important. This is something which is key to multimedia as well. We were talking about the different headlines and the different ways that we sell them with WAP headlines, SMS, for example. And we've also talked about NewsML and how, as a programming language, NewsML allows you to create all kinds of different content and let the users use it in multiple different ways. Okay? But in order to do that, the journalists and the editors have got to be thinking how to produce that. So you've got to be thinking about your headline, for example. Now, you know, keep it short. Is it a nice, short, punchy headline? Is it going to work? Is it going to appear on someone's screen? Is it going to run, you know, several different lines? At the moment, for our headlines, our news headlines, we try and keep them to 50 characters or less. Okay, and that includes spaces. We try not to run over that. WAP headlines are 30 characters. SMS is 120 characters. Okay, so SMS you can go wild on. I mean, you've got about 3 lines of text. I mean, this is great. A WAP headline, 30 characters, as I said before, is a nightmare to write, because it's got to make sense, and you've got to keep it. You're basically looking at probably no more than about 4 or 5 words in all. So it's got to make sense, and the 50-character main headline is also something tricky to do, and a lot of people have struggled with that. But it's something that you've got to learn to do. I mean, not necessarily as a journalist when you're starting out, but it's something that would be a useful skill to practice doing, cutting down your headlines, keeping them nice and short and punchy. It also helps you focus on your writing skills as well, but this is something that we have to start doing as well. So we have to think of new technologies. The other thing we have to do is we have to know how these technologies work. So as journalists, it's no good going along to a newspaper and having the editor say, okay, look, we're going to be doing some photographs for iPad. I'm going, what's iPad? You know, I'm going to put it on the internet. Who? You've got to know these things. You've got to know the latest technology. You don't have to be, you know, brilliant at it. You don't have to know all the ins and outs and all the programming behind it, but you've got to know they exist. And you've got to know what they can do and how it looks. And when I mentioned the iPad earlier about the photographs using horizontal, all of you nodded your heads. You're all familiar with it. This is what I mean about being familiar. But you'd be surprised how many other journalists, seasoned journalists, if I mention that to them, they'll sit there and go, they've not understood what an iPad is and they don't know what horizontal means. They don't do photographs. A lot of journalists don't do photographs. So when you talk about portrait and horizontal, they're kind of, what's he on about? That's what photographers do. I'm a journalist, I don't need to know that. But you do need to know that. You've got to be thinking, you've got to understand how these things work. So it's very important to keep abreast of technology. And grabbing readers' attention, well, that's been the case for journalism since the beginning, you know, grabbing the reader's attention. But it's especially important now online, as I mentioned. You've got 10 seconds to get their attention. Okay, and that goes down to the choice of photographs as well. It also, when I was talking about the photographs of, making the photographs interesting, the first thing that's going to grab someone's attention when they come to a website is a photograph. If it's a good photograph, or it's a cuddly photograph, or it's an interesting photograph, they're going to click on that, or they're going to stop and pause and read what it's about, and then hopefully they'll click on it and they'll go into your website. That is important also for online media, because when you want advertising, going all the way back to the revenue we were talking about, you have to show how many clicks you've had on your website to the advertisers. You can't just say, oh yeah, everyone reads ours. Prove it. You've got to say, oh, we've had 50,000, 60,000, 100,000. Okay? So this is one way of proving it. You've got to get people to clicking onto your website and getting into the website so you can tally these things up. It's all down to revenue. More fluff than hard news. There we go. That's just reinforcing that point. This is what people want. Okay, they want the entertainment, they want the fun things, they want the things that are going to make them happy. Remember, people are traveling to work, they're depressed in the morning. Well, in Hong Kong it's hot and humid, but in other parts of the world it's cold and wet. They're fed up, they hate their job, they hate their wife, they hate their kids, they hate the train. Give them something fluffy and fun on their newspaper. Just cheer them up for 5 minutes, and you will get readers who will come back, which again goes into revenue. If you depress them with the news, then that's it. You're going to lose them forever. They're going to start listening to music and not bother reading the news at all. So we've got to be thinking in terms of entertaining people as well. Make it interesting, make it informative, and of course making it accurate. Okay, speed and accuracy. There we go. For the journalists, this is more about what it's going to mean for you coming into this industry. Now, it can be quite depressing as a journalist. When you're young and you're just starting out, it can be quite depressing when you're old and seasoned as well. But the thing is that the reality in journalism at the moment is that there are cutbacks. There are huge cutbacks. The Times recently ditched 40 journalists. Most newspapers have cut their newsroom staff by 20, 30, 40%. This is one of the realities that we're having to deal with. And the reason for that is because advertisers are leaving, advertisers are spending their money elsewhere. There have been global problems, of course, the global economic problems. That hits the media hard. It always does. Once the economy picks up, the media will pick up to a certain extent as well. But what is happening in between is this change towards multimedia, new ways of thinking, new products, new things that we've got to do. And as young journalists, you've got to be able to slot straight in there. Now, a survey in the UK recently, it was earlier this year, they talked to young students who are doing journalism courses, and they asked them whether or not they thought that what they were being taught, traditional values, were still important for a journalist. Virtually all of them said yes, that's all they wanted to learn. They didn't want to learn new technologies. No, we don't want to do Final Cut Pro, we don't want to learn how to shoot video, we want to be traditional journalists, that means writing. And what's scary about that is that you've got all these young journalists who are coming into the business who don't actually know what the business requires of them. I mean, the old days are where you just had to be outgoing, a sense of curiosity, and go into a newspaper and work your way from the bottom, writing stories, and you get promoted. That's gone. It's out the window. That doesn't happen anymore now, because there simply aren't any newspapers that do that. There used to be lots and lots of little, small, local newspapers where journalists got their training. Now they go to university to get their training. But a lot of them are still don't understand what the media requires of them. It requires you to be thinking, right? It requires you to be thinking about what's going on. You require a better general knowledge than you've had before. You've got to understand technology, but the most important thing, you've got to understand who you're writing for, okay? So here, understanding new technologies and keeping up with new technologies. Okay, you can't write for something that you don't understand. You've got to know what's going on there. You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to understand these technologies and how it's going to impact on you. The need to be versatile. This is increasingly important. At AFP now, we are training journalists to take video, because the latest generation of cameras that are coming out now, in fact, I mean, mobile phones now, you can take photographs and video. So it's very easy to do. So now when we send someone to cover a news story, it's not going to be just, go there with a notebook and then maybe the photographer will come along and take a picture later on. It's going to be the journalist with their camera writing the story, so doing what they traditionally do, interviewing people, talking to them, and then shooting some photographs and shooting a video to go with it if they think it's going to work. Okay? These are the things you've got to be able to think about doing. Whenever you cover a story, you've got to be thinking about the angles for it. So don't just, sit there and, in a press conference, for example, you sit in the back row there and you take notes. Press conference is over, you get up and you go back to the office. You've got to be thinking about maybe it's taking some pictures, what would be the best pictures, because it may be you that has to do that. And as staffer cuts back and as technology changes, then it's the journalist going to have to become, as I use the phrase again, multitasking, but you are going to have to become versatile and be able to do these things and understand how to do them. So you have to be thinking in terms of creating packages, okay? Not just writing a story, but writing a story and illustrating the story, whether it's with static photos or whether you're using video, okay? Wide range of general knowledge. Well, this is something which is, it is a traditional skill. Journalists are supposed to know things. And the whole point of becoming a journalist, or presumably the reason you became a journalist, is because you're curious about what goes on in the world. I don't think anyone becomes a journalist for the money. You do it because you're interested, you want to get out there, you're curious about what goes on, you've got a fascination and a drive to get out there, ask questions, find out what's going on behind that door, what's going on over there, what are these people doing. You need good general knowledge to do that, but increasingly you're going to need even more general knowledge because you're going to be asked to write about different things. You're not just writing about the news, you're going to have to understand sports, you're going to have to understand lifestyle, okay? So you're going to have to know when you go to these things, you're going to have to be so versatile that if an editor turns to you and says, right, go and cover a fashion show, you've got an understanding of what a fashion show is, you understand the basics, you can go and look it up and find out some questions to ask. You're not caught flat-footed, you're not specialising so much that you can't do anything else. Right? Because increasingly what's going to happen is that journalists are going to be asked to do more and more. As staffs are cut down, you've got fewer people to go out, editors are going to ask them to go out and do more. And the journalists that will keep their jobs and get promoted will be the ones that can do that. The ones that are stuck and don't know how to do it or come back and write an absolutely dreadful sports story because they don't know what sport they're talking about are going to have problems. So you've got to be more versatile and you've got to increase your general knowledge. Okay? Sense of humour, yeah. I put that in there because I think every journalist has got to have a sense of humour. I mean, you've got to laugh at the job some of the time. Because otherwise I think you become suicidal in journalism. It can be, you can become so cynical that, after a while you don't see the humour in it. But you need to see the humour in things. I think you need to see the humour in everything that you do, in every story that you go to, the people. It's about connection. Journalism is about connecting with people. I mean, one of the most valuable skills consistently put forward by editors is the ability to interview. This is what journalists, they say, if you ask them, what does a journalist need to have to be able to do? It's like one thing, if you can name one thing only, got to be able to interview, you've got to be able to talk to people, okay? This is something that's so key. So you've got to maintain, your sense of humour, you've got to be interested in people, you've got to understand people. You can be dealing with the most obnoxious person in the world, but you've got to interview them, so you've got to empathise to a certain extent with them to ask them questions, okay? So I think a sense of humour is probably one of the core values in journalism. Just to sum it up there, really, multitasking, that's going to grow as things go along. It's well worth learning some software. If you've, how many of you, I know Lawrence at the back there had done Final Cut Pro, but how many of you have done used Final Cut Pro? Premiere, right? Okay. Anything like that, if you know, knowing how to use that kind of software is an added skill. It's an extra skill. I mentioned to Robin before we started these lectures that actually the Wall Street Journal, apparently, so I was told yesterday, is only recruiting journalists who know how to use Final Cut Pro. The basic requirement for a new journalist there is to be able to use Final Cut Pro, or something like some editing suite. If you can use Premiere, you can move on to Final Cut Pro. There's, but you've got to be able to have these additional skills in there. Knowing how to shoot videos would be useful, even if it's just on a little Limex camera. Knowing what to do, what to look for. Photoshop could be useful if you can know how to do just the basics in Photoshop. Okay, these are all skills that, if you've got them on your CV, add considerable value to you. Okay, you don't have to be an expert. That's the good news. But if someone says to you, look, can you tidy up this photograph so I can use it? You can go into Photoshop and you can pretty much cut and paste and do a bit here and there and take the grey hairs out and what have you and put it in, you know. So understanding the basics, the more you can do, the better. Okay, multitasking. It's very important. And, right, when you go to a story, I mean, I'm going over the same ground, I suppose, to a certain extent again and again. But I want to emphasize these points because I was talking to some journalists yesterday at AFP, and I was surprised how little of this they actually knew or even thought about. Okay, and you know, these are professional journalists who are actually working. So, you know, if you can grasp these points now and really live these points, tattoo them on your forehead if necessary, then it's going to, you know, give you the jump on some of these older journalists. But essentially, just really, it's the idea of the circle. There is when you come to a story, it's consider all these different points, right? So don't just think about the basic story that you've written. You know, are there any links that you could use? Any websites? I mean, if you, for example, interviewed someone from the Hong Kong Red Cross, could you embed a link or write a link to the website, the Red Cross website, in your story? You know, for further details, go to www.redcross.org, whatever. What graphics would work? Maybe there's something, graphics, business stories, for example. You might go to a story where they say that you know, production has increased by X or Y amount, and there might be some graphics there. You can go along to the graphics department and say, oh, by the way, I'm doing this story. There might be a graphic in it. Depending on how approachable they are, and they usually are approachable, then this is something you've thought of. The same things with video. Is a video possible? What pictures are you going to use? Again, bearing in mind the entertainment value, making the pictures interesting. Bearing in mind also the question with pictures is if you've got too much in it, it looks dreadful on a website. You need simple pictures, 2 or 3 people in them, something like that. If you've got millions of people in the right place and gas going off everywhere, on a website, because it's smaller, especially the thumbnail, you can't actually see what it is, right? So you think in photographs, start thinking about what's going to work on there as well. And the videos as well, you know, can you do the videos? Maybe you can do it yourself. You know how to do it. You're going out in the story, you've got a camera with you, you shoot a little video, you come back, your newspaper's got an online presence, you just go to there and say, oh, by the way, I shot 45 seconds of this, you know, here it is. These are things that they're going to be looking for. They may not have thought about it, but they're certainly things they're going to be looking for. So it's really, you know, up to you to be thinking in terms of these sort of terms when you start thinking about stories. If you go on later on to subbing and things like that, the newsrooms today have changed. AFP has started what they call a 4XML project. I don't know why it's called a 4XML project, but anyway, it's got XML in there, so we know it's up to date and really exciting. The idea is that the new newsroom is not going to be news here, photo somewhere in the other part of the building, graphics down in the basement, an artist maybe in a little cubby hole somewhere else there, and never talking to each other. The only people that talk are with the heads of these departments that meet once a day. The idea for the new newsroom is that everyone is in the same room. So you have a desk. You can see this at AFP. We've redesigned our when we moved to our new office. We have a photo desk right next to the news desk with a multimedia desk and a graphics desk. This means that when everything happens, all the desks are aware of it at the same time. The news desk, you know, the bells go off when there's an urgent coming through. The graphics editor is aware of what's going on, a photo aware of what's going on, and they can straight away start planning what they're going to do, what photos we can do. If we don't have any photographs, do we have archive photographs we can use? The video editor can start thinking in terms of, have they got anyone who can go down and shoot something? If not, can we get one of the reporters to go down and shoot it, or one of the photographers to go down and shoot it? So it's interaction. Straight away, you're starting to think of producing the product, thinking about this. Whereas before it used to be that the reporter would be assigned by the editor to go and cover something. The photo editor would assign a photographer who may or may not go at the same time as the reporter. The graphics department probably wouldn't find out until later because they were in a different part of the building, so someone might think of a graphic. And, sorry, that's flashing in my face. Are you trying to send Morse messages? Yeah. But these things were disconnected. I mean, I've worked in reporting when I've gone along to cover something and I've sort of mentioned there might be a photographer or said, you know, there might be a picture in it. The photographers turned up the next day to take the picture. So the people I spoke to have had to come back in, sit down and get photographed. So we can, you know, this is nonsense. I mean, it's not good on a newspaper, but it's nonsense nowadays. So this is the new newsrooms are getting everyone thinking about this. And the lines are starting to get blurred a lot more. I mean, it won't be so much, graphics saying, I will do a graphic, but graphics can go up to the news and say, look, give me some information on this. I need this. Can your reporter do this? Can he write a sidebar? Can he write 100 words that I can then use for a graphic? Photo have got to be, thinking about it as well. Can you send a, reporter to do that? Or can the photographer who's on the ground, can he take some notes and come back with it? Again, versatility. A reporter who's sent from our bureaus to cover these things cannot sit there and say, no, I don't take photographs and I don't do video. It doesn't happen anymore now. They've got to know how to do it, and they've got to do it. Otherwise, they're going to be less use. So versatile, everyone working together, everyone thinking this kind of thing all the time, thinking in multimedia. Okay, the traditional skills, we mentioned all of those. These are the traditional reporting skills, and this is actually based on a couple of surveys that I found, which have been taken using editors and asking what they thought were traditional skills. All of you, of course, probably all have all these skills, I'm sure. Interviewing down there, news judgment, what is a news story, what's not a news story, but again, with the multimedia idea, what is a news story has suddenly changed. Okay, a plane crash clearly is a news story. A burnt koala bear might be a bigger story than the news crash, depending on how many have killed in the news crash, in the plane crash, sorry, not the news crash. But this is how the news judgment. When it comes to producing an online paper, we now have to be thinking, or sending out to our clients, we now have to be thinking, what are they going to consider as the main news stories of the day? So be flexible in what you consider as being the main ones. Writing and interviewing, obviously key things. You can't be a journalist unless you can write an interview. Basically, there's no way around that. Research, knowledge, curiosity, and I put sense of humour again in there because I really do think that is important. But being able to do research, again, that's to a certain extent that ties in online. You've got to be able to do research nowadays online. In the old days on newspapers, and we're talking a long time ago, if you did any research, you went down to the basement and had dusty cardboard cartons of old newspapers, 10 years old, mould growing on, things like that. That was the archive. That was state of the art. And then they did, what they used to call it with the old the machines, the reading machines. You twiddle the knobs. Yeah, right. Microfiche. You twiddle the knobs and you get these sort of photographs flopping around.
Focus it.
That's right, yeah. It's horrible. But now you've got online. But also the thing is, you've got access online through your mobile phone. So on the spot, when you're interviewing someone, you can be doing searches, you can look up background. Yeah? These are all things that you can do. If you go to interview someone, and you sit in the taxi or the train on the way to the interview, Google them. See if you can find out something about them. Okay? So these are all things you need to do, so you've got to be able to do this research. It's amazing how few people do. Because again, not thinking in terms of technology, not thinking in terms of the multimedia aspect of things. And also when you're going in, to interview someone, have they, we're talking about video and things, but have they got some video or something they can give you or something that might be of interest? Scientists, for example, when they do new research, very often take some excellent slides of new bugs and beasties and things that they've done. So, think about, because you're thinking about pictures, because you're being versatile, you finish your interview with the professor and you say, well, if you've got any slides that I can take back, or you can email me that we can then use on the newspaper, and get permission straight away, so you can go back to your editor and say, look, I've got the story, and we've got these slides to do as well. We've got these photographs, these JPEG images they're going to send to us. Because you're thinking, broader, thinking package. Ready. Summary, right. Multimedia is essential to attract new revenue and readers. That's the bottom line. That's what it's all about. That's what we're in the business for now. Especially these days. We need to go online and we need to do it well. Keep in step with technology. That is one of the principal things. That's probably the hardest thing for a news organisation to do, because technology changes so rapidly. It's very difficult, and because it takes time to bring things in. I mean, bringing video in, for example, is not something you can do overnight. You can't just pop down to the shop and buy a bit of software and a couple of cameras and hope it's going to work. Okay, you've got to train people. You've got to set aside facilities for them, budget for the whole thing. It takes time, but they have to keep up with new technologies, and it's important for the individual to keep up with new technologies as well, so you're aware of what's going on out there and aware of the different trends. Flexible and always learning, and that's more, I mean, that's always been the case. I think journalists always need to learn, but I think these days it's become increasingly important. Okay, and you have the resources to do it. I mean, online, the internet is a wonderful resource for getting information, for getting ideas for stories, looking up tweets, blogs. This is where story ideas come from. This is where the first information, I mean, when we had the earthquake in Haiti earlier this year, some of the first images and some of the first information came on tweets. People there sending little messages out, tweeting, there's an earthquake, several dead, hundreds dead, this happened. And this alerted news organizations, because we were looking at this, to how big it was going on, so we could get back to our people and push them in the different directions, and we could start building up a picture of what's happening. So blogs and things like that, also, reading those. Obviously, you treat them with a great deal of caution, because you don't know who's writing it or how accurate they are. But it's a way of gaining information, it's a way of finding out what's going on. Right? For young journalists, you've got to go out and get stories. Don't, when you go to a newspaper, you're not going to be sitting there waiting for someone to tell you what to do. You've got to come in with story ideas. You've got to go up to your editor and say, look, what about this? This is a story. Sell the idea to them. So use the technology, use what's out there, right, to do your research, to keep yourselves informed of what's going on. Right? Know how to use the technology, be versatile, be prepared to do the full multimedia package. Because multimedia is not an optional extra. I like that. Right? But that's the bottom line. That's what the media now has to focus on. It is not an optional extra. It's not a luxury. It's not something that we can do in 10 years' time or 5 years' time. It's something we have to do now, and we have to do it well. And for you guys going out into the media world, that's something you're going to be doing even more, and hopefully better than we're doing now. Are there any questions?
Because the advertiser can know that how much clicks on each news, and do you think is it helping you to do the report, or make your job more tougher?
Well, it helps. Actually, it does help, because as I said, what we have a system where we look at Yahoo and Google News every day to see what are the main stories that are being clicked on, what is the most popular, which ones are being sent to other people. And that tells us what people out there are reading, basically. So we might have a big story of the day which we thought was going to be the big story, and as I mentioned, the koala bears are the one that's far and away the story that everyone is talking about. So that for us means that if we haven't got a koala bear story, we need to get it pretty damn quickly. But next time it will also tell us that that is the kind of story that readers want. So maybe we can get a story in there. It doesn't mean we're going to supplant the news and say, oh, well, we're not going to, Obama, no, sorry, we're not going to cover you today. We want fluffy animals. But we know that this is the kind of thing that people want. So it gives us an idea of the kind of news that we need to be thinking about generating, right? And how to prioritize our resources as well. And as I mentioned, in this, lifestyle and these sort of things are increasingly popular. This is what people want more and more and more of. So we've had to devote increasing amounts of resources to covering that sort of thing. And that has made it difficult in some cases. You've got a journalist in a bureau, and maybe we got 2 or 3 journalists in a bureau, and they've got limited resources. And they're suddenly getting demands, well, you've got to cover the news, and you've got to cover the business stories, and oh yeah, by the way, we also want some lifestyle, we want some entertainment, we want some science, we want some high-tech. People stories would be nice as well if you've got time. Excuse me. It does take a lot of resources. And it means that the writers have got to be flexible. They've got to be able to turn their hand, because writing a lifestyle story is very different from writing a news story. You've got to be able to do both. Right? So this is again what I mean about flexibility. You've got to be able to, to do this, to be able to generate all these different kinds of stories as the demand goes on. So, yes, clicks are very useful. And also, of course, it's useful then when we, go and talk to advertisers and things. We can say, well, look, our stories, people are reading our stories.
It's easier to write a lifestyle story than the hot news?
No, I don't think it is. a good lifestyle, a good feature story is a real skill, actually. A good journalist can probably write a decent feature story, but the really good feature stories, often you get people who tend to sort of specialize in that direction. It's difficult to do. It's quite difficult to do. But being a versatile journalist, you can do both.
I see some stories about maybe someone trying to.
It's okay, I can hear.
Someone trying to lose weight. Someone is trying to lose weight, and so the reporter doesn't need to do much research. Just shows readers these guys trying to lose weight, how they exercise or something else. I think it's not very strict like hard news. Just as
Okay. Well, okay, so you're writing a story about someone losing weight. You've got the basic story of the individual. You want to interview the individual and how they're losing weight. But also you want to be doing some research on the different ways of losing weight. Is it dangerous, medically dangerous? Are there things you shouldn't do? Is this person losing weight the wrong way? Are they trying an experimental medicine? Is it something new? If it's new, who designed it? Where did they design it? What company designed it? What's their track record? Okay? You need to know that, and you need to inform your viewers of that, and you need to know the website for this company as well. So you could put that into your story. That would be useful as well. Okay? Where are they losing weight? Are they losing weight at home? Is it the first time they lost weight? These are things you can get from the interview of the person, but for the background, you do need to do your research. You need to find out what's going on. You know, how to lose weight. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a good idea? Is it dangerous? Has there been problems in the past? All these things. You'd also need to certainly interview other people, maybe a doctor or someone like that who could give you this information as well. All of this has to be planned. So no, a feature is not, hey, I'm just going to go and talk to this guy losing weight and I'll write down what he says. That's not a feature story. Okay? No, that's a chat with someone. Okay? So no, it's not. It's not easier by any means. A good feature story can take a great deal of work and research.
and about the advertising, I want to know whether the advertising on the website is more expensive than on newspaper, or it's cheaper.
That's not really my field. I don't sell advertising space, thank goodness. I don't think I'd be any good at it. Generally speaking, I would imagine the rates are probably similar, something like that. It depends. There's so many different ways of packaging advertising. In a newspaper, it was done on the size, but it was also what page it was on and what edition it was on. If it was in colour, if it was in black and white. There's so many different variations. I would imagine that it's probably somewhere in the same. Depends on the market as well. I mean, if the market is bad and newspapers are desperate for advertising, obviously they're going to cut their rates. So.
You say on the website says you have to use the multimedia, the camera shooting or take photos is very the cost is very high. So how the website can.
Well, it can be very high if you're going into full broadcast video. If you're going to produce things that are broadcast quality, which means that they can be used by television news directly, with voiceovers and you know, a journalist going into the field, spending time there, filming, shooting, editing, doing the whole package. That can be very expensive because you need all the software and the hardware that goes along with that. For web clips, it's still not cheap. You've got to buy the cameras, you've got to train people. That takes up time and resources, obviously. You've got to have software, you've got to have editing suites, but you don't need nearly as much. And in terms of video, video is an essential. Now, I mean, for wire services like AFP, and even for other media, if they've got an online presence, they need to be thinking video. So now this is something they're going to have to find the money for. But there are cheaper ways of doing it. I mean, you don't have to spend an absolute fortune on it. You can buy a Limax camera from any shop down here, Broadway or somewhere like that, get a journalist, get them to practice, get some Final Cut Pro, stick it on your computer, and you've got the basic elements. It's not going to be wonderful, but you've got the basic elements.
So you also say that the reporter should be versatile, So when I'm reporting something, I'm not the professional in the multimedia area. But when I'm reporting something, I find the things very lively. I want to shoot it. So I use maybe my touch. The lecture is very low and the thing is not very clear. So that is also okay to put on the website.
Probably not. It depends. I mean, it really depends. If you were, for example, if you were somewhere where the police were making an arrest, right, and there was things going on, grappling with people, dragging them off to a van, you got a photograph of the person being thrown in the back of the van. Even if the photograph wasn't very good quality, it's still very usable. Yes. To answer your question, yes. You've thought about it. You've taken a picture. You come back with a few pictures. Maybe they can use them. It doesn't have to be great quality. I mean, you've all seen YouTube. And you've also seen some of the photographs that come out. You know, when you go to any, I mean, if you looked at Aung San Suu Kyi recently when she was released, you had her standing on her porch and you had a sea of cameras. They were all filming it and photographing it to sell to newspapers. Or maybe just take home as well, a few of them. But most of them are probably thinking, oh, I could sell this, CNN, here I come. And it's amazing. Any demonstration, any event like that, and you'll just watch these cameras. And if they haven't got access, I mean, if AFP, for example, didn't have access because we're not, you know, simply not there, we don't know what's going on. Something like a plane crash, for example, you know, someone on the scene takes a shot and uses it. The koala bear story, going back to the koala bear story, the photographs we used from that were shot by a fireman using his mobile phone. Those were the only photographs that they had until much later on when it was put into a vet's care and they did it up, and the next day they had a press conference with the koala bear. But the original photographs were taken on a mobile camera. They were not good quality, but they were usable because it was the picture of the little koala all singed and burned and looking sorry for itself.
Did you go out and find that fireman, or did he contact the media?
He contacted some of the media, and we went and found him as well, so we could get permission to use as well.
Yeah, and do you pay him?
Oh, for sure.
And if you get a great pic now, a few years ago, you could go and negotiate, right? Because you have one picture as a negative or as a bit of film. But nowadays, once somebody's uploaded it, it's everybody's, right? So is it as easy to negotiate if you've got a pic that's really valuable that you happen to be there to take? Can you get as much money as you
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can.
There you are.
You can sell it. It still works the same way. You just phone up the photo department and say, look, I've got a picture of this. And then you negotiate. Yeah. There are people who make thousands and thousands of dollars for a really good newspaper photograph. Of course, there's all the exclusivity rights once they've sold it to someone. Whereas before, of course, you had control of the negative. But now, once they've sold it, then that's it. You know, there's exclusive. But no, you can still do. Yeah, certainly you can do that. Absolutely. And as cameras get better, you know, most cameras now take high definition video and photo. Even the phones can do it. So, you know, you're going to get this more and more often happening now as people are going to be taking these photographs and contacting news agencies. So, yeah, the journalists can do that as well. If you're there, take a photograph. And boom, you know, this is something I would think, if you're doing anything, if you're covering a news story, even a press conference, if you don't have a photographer with you, maybe just take a couple of photographs, because maybe the news editor will use them. Right? If you get something quirky, something interesting. That's what I mean about thinking in terms of multimedia, you know, thinking outside of what you know, just writing a story. Thinking about all the different elements and what you can do.
I think we're out of time. Does anybody have a last question? Maybe Tina? Tina?
Regarding using writing the headline, you said like we need to use it maximum like 50 characters on the web, and is that every word we need to make it like search by Google or something? That is really important, right? So for someone to
making it searchable, yeah. That's a very good question. But it's not something, unfortunately, it's not something you can really do with headlines, because to some extent you can. If you put, say, Obama in there, that's a searchable term. But what we actually do is in the metadata, we have searchable terms which we embed in the story, which you don't see, and which is not the journalist who does that. That's the original writer, when they put it in there, they will have it. So it will have, for example, the country, So it might be something like US, politics, Obama, India, speech, dance. Okay? Now the News ML can be programmed to look for that and use that when you're archiving. That's how you archive. So that if someone does a search on a News ML archive, for example, they could use the search term Obama India dance, and then it will find it. You don't have to put it in the headline. You can do. I mean, you know, it's a thought, but because it doesn't hurt. I mean, the more ways you can get to have something searched, yeah, it helps. But I don't think you could do it. I think you would constrict it so much. You spend several hours, you know, sitting there trying to find. I mean, it takes long enough trying to do a decent headline as it is, really.
Oh, I have a little souvenir for you.
Oh, thank you very much.
And thank you so much for coming. It was very inspiring.
Pleasure,
Appreciate it.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you want a picture? Okay.
Should I, hang
We're
on.
gonna negotiate with the photo editor for that.
Got to get a good picture now. I'm going to get a good picture. Quirky picture. See? Quirky. And one more, a bit more serious. And perhaps we should do the, you know, the old football captain one. Exchanging.
Oh, okay, all right. Good job.